This election, I, like many other young Australians, are desperate for a leader with a bold, daring vision for our country. Someone who has the guts to tackle the very real, very big challenges that our nation is facing. Instead, you've offered a meek smattering of small target policies which fall far short of the action needed for meaningful change. And I guess it seems like this election, the choice is between the Liberals, who you argue will make things worse, and Labor, who from their policy offerings aren't interested in making things better. So I guess I'm wondering what hope there is for those of us who feel as though we're on the Titanic and the two major political parties in this country are arguing over who gets to rearrange the deck chairs.
Well, thanks very much for the question. And with respect, I think we are putting forward a very serious offering at this election of a better future. We have a serious plan for climate change that will see by 2030, 82% of the national energy market be renewables. That will reduce emissions by 43%, will create 604,000 jobs, including, of course, new industries that will emerge while we're doing so. That will create $52 billion of private sector investment. We see that as a major driver of productivity and economic reform. And together with that, we have a National Reconstruction Fund to support new industries, to support existing industries to transform as well. And we want to train Australians to fill those jobs of the future. By creating Jobs and Skills Australia, we'll have 465,000 fee-free TAFE places, 20,000 additional university places. We have a plan for cheaper childcare, a plan for cheaper electricity. We have a plan to make more things here using that National Reconstruction Fund. And we have plans including recognising First Nations people through constitutional change and a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament. We have comprehensive plans to deal with the challenges that we have at the moment. The alternative is 3 more years of drift, 3 more years of a Prime Minister who says it's not my job to solve the big challenges that Australia is facing. You're right to identify them. They are big. We have practical plans that are implementable in our first term.
To Brent's question, though, I mean, Labor is taking a more limited policy offering to this election than 3 years ago. Is it possible you've underestimated the appetite for reform coming out of the pandemic?
Well, what we've done is to identify 2 things, David. One is the pandemic showed us the strength of Australian society. There is that sense whereby people have made sacrifices. People have been magnificent over the last couple of years. But it's also shown the weaknesses in the economy. It's also shown circumstances whereby I think people want a clear path of change. They don't want everything upended, but they want to see that change and reform come. And if in 3 years' time I'm on this program asking to be re-elected, and we have cheaper childcare, we have greater women's participation in the workforce, we have a National Reconstruction Fund that's creating those new industries, we're addressing the challenge of climate change, we have more secure work, then I think that is an ambitious agenda, but it's one that is practical, one that's achievable, and I've been very cautious to not promise things that can't be delivered.
So what's practical, what's achievable? I mean, is the reality that it has, in your view, become harder in modern politics to even propose serious reforms if it means one group of society is going to be worse off, even if it is for the national good? It is too hard to do that now?
I believe it's still possible. I think, for example, on climate, people want to end the climate wars. People are sick of the debate. And you have a policy that's been announced by us that's supported not just by the trade union movement, but the Business Council of Australia, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry that I addressed today, Australian Industry Group and the National Farmers Federation. People do want solutions. People
but it's not as ambitious as last.
Get away.
That's
as well, I think people have conflict fatigue. People are sick of the arguments that have really dominated politics for a considerable period of time. We had prime ministers changing. We had a government elected last time essentially campaigning on not being us, campaigning against Labor. And this time again, you've had a government that struggles with the present but has no plan for the future. Even their cost of living measures, they all end once people have cast their vote. Now, we have a plan for the future beyond that, to grow productivity, to grow the economy, to grow opportunity. And I think that there are very stark differences between the major parties at this election.
Well, just, Brent, quickly back to you. Are these big ideas enough for you?
It's all just a bit of spin, right? I mean, your shared equity house buying scheme does nothing to address the underlying issues affecting the skyrocketing price of home ownership. Your climate policy doesn't do enough to reduce emissions at a rate which is necessary to avoid global catastrophe. Your border protection policy doesn't do anything to even look at the cost, not just in terms of fiscal cost, but the cost of human life, of offshore detention and boat turnbacks.
Well, Brent, our shared equity scheme, for example, is just one of our housing policies. We have a Housing Australia Future Fund. We're going to invest in social housing. I grew up in public housing. I know the importance of having a secure roof over your head can make to your life. And one of the things that I often say is that I know the difference that government can make to people's lives because I've lived it. That's my story. The son of a single mum who was an invalid pensioner, crippled up with rheumatoid arthritis, who grew up in public housing not far from here on Pyrmont Bridge Road. And I've been able to aspire now to be Prime Minister of the country. We'll create, in terms of housing, 20,000 additional social housing units, 10,000 affordable housing dwellings for essential workers. We have an emergency housing fund. Tonight, like every night, women and children will be turned away from shelters because there just aren't spaces. So they'll sleep in their car, they'll sleep in a park, or worse still, they'll go back to a dangerous situation. These are all serious policies that will make a difference.